I get this question a lot, and that is, why don't you attend a church? Why don't you attend a synagogue? They always tell me, you don't even go to church. So I wanted to tackle this question and answer that as to why I do not attend a church, why I do not attend a synagogue. I have mentioned many times on this channel that I'm not Christian, I'm not Messianic, I'm not anything of that nature. But many people will naturally want to know why someone does not attend a synagogue, why someone does not attend a congregation of like-minded people. This is the norm today. We have to understand that we all crave connection. That connection can come in many ways, shapes, and forms. Some people will go to a gym. That is their connection, and they meet people there of like minds. Many people will find a connection with the people of like minds at work. This is a natural inclination for people to want to be around people with like minds. For many people in today's society, this is church. This is a synagogue. And people will be willing to do anything to find that connection with people. This is what brings people happiness. God even told us himself when he created Adam, the first man, he said, "It is not good that man shall be alone." And he made a helpmeet for him named Eve. And this is why family is important. This is why tribal identity is important. We're all just craving a connection to be with other people of like minds. No one wants to be alone. This idea of having to be part of a congregation, or in Christian circles, this idea of not forsaking the assembly of themselves together as the day approaches, this is a Christian concept taught by Paul. What God tells us is simply to obey his laws and do them, and not follow a multitude to do evil. So when God tells us in Exodus 23 not to follow a multitude to do evil, just because someone is going in a direction and you see a group of people in masses going one direction, he says simply just to obey his laws and his commands, no matter if that's the case. If everybody's doing it, that doesn't make it right. He says to only cling to his laws and his commandments, and it doesn't matter if you're a part of a congregation or not. So when I hear people say, you don't even go to church, or why don't you attend a congregation, this is understandable because in today's society, this is what we crave. But we have to understand that what I am pursuing is a relationship with the God of Israel. And that only comes by seeking out his will and his laws and his commands and doing them. So yes, it is very important to crave that connection with someone or something. It is just that my connection that I'm seeking is with our Heavenly Father. And that's only done by keeping his laws and his commands and doing it in truth. If I am starting to create my own laws, my own commandments, and my own statutes and things of that nature, then it's not him that I'm seeking anymore. It is then just seeking a congregation to be a part of. And this is where the line is drawn for me. But in time, there is a redemption. There is a gathering together of those with like minds that we are awaiting. And the time of living and walking this alone will be no more. And this is what we're waiting for. And that day will be great. But until then, you have to be willing to walk alone. And this is what I'm doing. But as you'll see in the end of this video, I'm going to show you why. Where are the commandments? Where's the instructions given that God gives that I follow as to why I do not attend a congregation of any sort? So I'm going to tackle this question because of the frequency of the question that is always asked. As I always state on this channel, all my decisions are based on God's laws and his prophets that came before us and those instructions that he gave. I use the Hebrew Bible, known today in the church as the Old Testament, as I call it, the Word of God, as my measuring reed for all truth. So if it does not align with that, then I don't follow it, because I have to obey God's voice and his laws if I'm going to worship the God of Israel in truth. So to start this off, I want you to look at a Psalm 127, and look at verse 1. Except Jehovah build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except Jehovah keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. So you have to understand, many will see this psalm and they'll recognize the wording, they'll recognize the principle, something that is spoken in the Gospels. Yeah, Jesus himself also quoted from this, saying, "Every house that my Father hath not built will be thrown down. Every plant that my Father hath not planted will be rooted up." So again, I'm not Christian, but this statute and this principle that Jesus taught, I agree with. This is why I don't like labels, because if I put myself in a box, that means I can't go outside the box that is given. So I just like to take truth where it's found and apply it. That's all. And this is a principle that Jesus taught in Matthew chapter 15. So let's take a look at this, and I think this will help Christians understand this concept if they understand the words that Jesus spoke of himself in relation to this Psalm 127. Take a look.
Then came his disciples and said unto him, Knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended after they heard this saying? But he answered and said, Every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up. Let them alone, they be blind leaders of the blind, and if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch.
So Jesus here is teaching the same principle. Unless you are building the house upon God's laws and his principles, then it's going to fall. If we are not building this congregation based on the laws that God gives, then when the time comes, it will fall. It will not stand in that day. The people labor in vain that build it. The Pharisees at the time, as you'll see in Matthew chapter 15, what they were doing is they were creating their own commandments. They were washing their hands and calling it a commandment of God. And what Jesus was doing in this chapter is he was rebuking the Pharisees, saying, you've made the commandments of God to none effect. Why? Because they created their own laws, their own statutes, and told everybody else and their followers to do it. So therefore, he is telling them, look, if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. And where does he get this idea from? Jesus is just repeating the same sentiments found in Proverbs chapter 28. Take a look.
He that turneth away his ear from hearing the law, even his prayer shall be an abomination. Whoso causeth the righteous to go astray in an evil way, he shall fall himself into his own pit. But the upright shall have good things in possession.
So a congregation that is building their house and building their walls not on the precepts and the laws that God gave, it's going to fall. And if the blind lead the blind, then both are going to fall into the ditch. If someone is leading someone astray away from the law of God, then he himself will go into captivity. This is where you'll hear the sentiments that I've taught in another video that you see in Revelation. It says, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword shall be killed with the sword. If you can't teach other people to walk in God's laws, you are leading them into a place of captivity due to a lack of knowledge. This is the whole reason that we went into captivity in the first place and were driven away from the land. The leaders of the time had forgotten God's laws, and because of that, they led the people into a place of captivity. Isaiah 5:13 says itself, my people are gone into captivity for a lack of knowledge. And as I've always stated, Hosea 4:6, he says, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will reject you. You shall be no priest to me, because you have forgotten the law of God. So when someone asks me why I don't attend churches, it's for this simple precept. I always show them Ezekiel chapter 20, where it states that we're not supposed to do what our fathers are telling us to do. We're not supposed to do what the spiritual leaders of the time are telling us to do if they're telling us to go away from the commandments that God gave. Veering away from God's Sabbaths, his holy appointed times, his festivals that he gave us, is what makes us holy. If we start adding things and taking things away from that, then we no longer are holy and separated unto the God of Israel. Then we just join a group that we want to connect with. That's all it is. So you can see this example today that you see Sunday worship, you see Christmas, you see Easter, you see Halloween, you see all these pagan festivities and all these things that God never gave us to do. And if we start partaking in those things, this is exactly what Ezekiel 20 was telling us not to do. Things have been added, removed, and God says, look, if you keep my statutes and you keep my laws, you'll live in them. Take a look.
But I said unto the children in the wilderness, walk ye not in the statutes of your fathers, neither observe their judgments, nor defile yourselves with their idols. I am Jehovah your God. Walk in my statutes, keep my judgments, and do them, and hallow my Sabbaths, and they shall be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am Jehovah your God. Notwithstanding, the children rebelled against me, and they walked not in my statutes, neither kept my judgments to do them, which if a man do, he shall even live in them. They polluted my Sabbaths. Then I said, I would pour out my fury upon them to accomplish mine anger against them in the wilderness.
This instruction that you see by the hand of Ezekiel the prophet is no different than God already told us in his own law. This is why I always use the law and the prophets to guide me on the instructions that I should give. He is just echoing what was told already in Leviticus chapter 18. When you see, he says, don't learn the ways of the nations. Keep my Sabbaths, keep my laws, do them, and use these Sabbaths that there'll be a sign between me and you perpetually for all generations, that he is the one that sanctifies us unto him. It's not easy walking alone. It never is. Like I said, human beings want to crave a connection. We want that fellowship with other human beings of like minds. And most people are willing to do anything just to have that. But what I'm doing is on the contrary. I'm willing to forsake everything to have a connection with the God of Israel and walk alone to do it. That's what it really comes down to. What are you craving? Are you craving a connection with the God of Israel in keeping his laws and his statutes and doing those? Or are you craving a connection with a congregation? So I certainly understand it. It's very lonely to do that. We've chosen and made an oath to God that we would keep his laws, his statutes, and his commandments, and made him our God, and he's made us his people. And we have to stand strong with that, just like Elijah did. He was willing to walk alone, and he even got suicidal at certain points because he was very zealous for the commandments and zealous for the covenant and telling the people to come back to the laws and come back to the covenant.
1 Kings 19:9, And he came thither unto a cave and lodged there, and behold, the word of Jehovah came to him, and he said unto him, What doest thou here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous for Jehovah, God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword, and I, even only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away.
So I'm hoping that the testimony that I and others around the world are carrying right now, and that we're willing to walk alone, will be a testimony and show people that we're faithful to the God of Israel and his laws and his commandments that he gave, rather than seeking a congregation to be a part of. Because God never gave us such a law. He actually tells us, as you just saw in Ezekiel chapter 20, that if you see everybody else doing that, don't do it. Don't follow that way. Don't follow a multitude to do evil, as he told us in his own law. And although we have no congregation of people around us per se right now, God does promise that if we obey his laws and do his commandments with all our heart, our soul, and our mind, he'll gather us back to the land of Israel from one end of heaven to the other and bring us back to the land of Israel. Then we will have a congregation, a small remnant of sorts, as we've been discussing in these videos, that God will bring back to the land if we're faithful, and then we'll have a congregation that believes the same way we do. A holy people that was willing to walk alone, but now they're no longer alone. Also, if one will recall, during the time of Elijah, when he was willing to walk alone, God said, I have reserved 7,000 men that have not bowed to the image of Baal and have not kissed his lips. And this is exactly what God's looking for right now. Even though we're walking alone, he's looking for a small remnant that will not bow down to another god. And I understand the difference between Christianity and Judaism, so I just wanted to point that out, because that's exactly what's going on right now. Those that are willing not to bow down to any other god, and they're willing to walk alone. So we have built our house upon a rock, and it will not fall. And there is no other rock other than Jehovah. And may we not be as our forefathers who forgot the covenant, who forsook the commandments and turned back, but rather we would be faithful to these commandments and remember the rock that begot us and not become unmindful. Many in the church today have claimed what Paul preaches, and that is that Jesus or Christ is their rock. The problem with this is God gave us in his own law, in what many don't understand is the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. God makes it very clear who the rock is, and that we should not forget our rock. Take a look.
Because I will publish the name of Jehovah, ascribe ye greatness unto our God. He is the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is he. They provoked him to jealousy with strange gods, with abominations. They provoked him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers feared not. Of the rock that begot thee, thou art unmindful, and hast forgotten the God that formed thee. And he shall say, Where are their God, their rock in whom they trusted? See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God with me. I kill, I make alive, I wound, and I heal. Neither is there any that can deliver out of my hand.
So we have to be very careful about how we build our house and what we are building it upon. If we are building it upon things that God has not commanded us, it'll fall. This is why I'm willing to walk alone. This is why others around the globe right now, as scattered as they may be, they're willing to walk alone because they're zealous, just as Elijah was in that day. And just as Jesus was teaching in Matthew 15 that the people were honoring God with their lips, but their heart was removed, this is the same principle that is being taught from Isaiah. Isaiah said, I will do a marvelous thing among these people. The wisdom of their wise men shall perish. These people have removed their heart from me, and their precepts are taught by commandments of men. Sunday worship and all these other things that are being taught are things that have veered away from God said to do, so our heart is removed. We're just doing lip service. You see, somewhere along the line, we've forgotten what the goal was.
Neo, sooner or later you're going to realize, just as I did, there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path.
We think that going to a congregation is what makes a person righteous. As if to say, going to the doctor and he gives you something to fix your sickness, he gives you a prescription, but you don't do it, it's the same way. I remember the prophet Ezekiel. God was telling the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 33 that you'll give him the words of God. You will tell them all the words that I tell you to say, but they don't do it. It's the same thing today. Somehow we have gotten to the point in society today that we think that just simply going to a congregation is something that makes you righteous. That's not what makes someone righteous in God's eyes. The goal is to take God's words and live by them. We've become hypocritical as a whole in thinking that going and not doing is righteousness. And this all stems, like I said in other videos, from the doctrine of hypocrisy we were warned against that Paul presents, faith without works. So again, we have to come back to what the real goal is, and that is to be conformed to God's image. And the only way to do that is by hearkening unto the words that he gave us. So if your heart is right with God, then we will seek his laws and seek his commandments. Just as David said in Psalm chapter 40, I delight to do thy will, thy law is within my heart. I'm not a Christian, but Jesus is teaching a principle from Isaiah chapter 29, as you just saw, that will answer the question of why I don't attend a synagogue or an organized congregation of sorts today. If the people are not doing the things that God says to do, that's not my church. That's not my congregation.